Throughout the late 19th and into the 20th centuries, nations developed new naval technologies that led them to the creation of ever larger ships. One of those types of ships was, of course, the battleship. Every naval power, ranging from the United Kingdom to Japan, was developing battleships. Even South American and Balkan nations were caught up in creating these colossal fighting machines. However, not every battleship created or idea developed was the best, or in our case, could be controversial. In today's video, we're going to discuss three of history's most controversial battleships. Starting with the most controversial class on this list, the Bismarck Class. At least according to you all, based on two polls with around 5,500 votes at the time of writing this. The Bismarck Class battleships, consisting of Bismarck and her sister Tirpitz, were among the most powerful surface combatants built for the German Navy during the Second World War. To this day, they remain among the most famous and controversial warships ever constructed. Their design pushed beyond the limits of interwar naval treaties, with their service careers being dramatic yet short. Their ultimate fates left behind legacies of debate over their value, power, and weaknesses. The origin of the class lies in the interwar naval treaties, particularly for Germany, the Versailles Treaty and Washington Naval Agreement, which limited the German Navy in rebuilding their fleet, as I'll mention in the section on the Scharnhorst Class, with the Panzerschiff of the Deutschland class and the battleships of the Scharnhorst class testing the limits of these treaties. Yet by the mid-1930s, German naval planners were moving more openly towards building larger and larger vessels. The Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935 gave it a veneer of legality, which paved the way for the construction of larger capital ships, which from their conception were similar in terms of their dimensions and armament to foreign types. Out of this policy came the Bismarck Class, being partially derived from German capital ships of the First World War, particularly the Bayern-class battleships. The Bismarck Class was officially described at 35,000 tons, but in reality was upwards of 50,000 tons fully loaded. An interesting decision to say the least, with the project as a whole being described as a symbolic policy for the German government to build capital ships that could project power, with Admiral Erich Raeder and other leaders of the Navy desiring battleships to challenge British sea power, or at least that's what the idea was with Plan Z and the overall building program, because they certainly weren't going to match the might of the Royal Navy with two battleships. Anyway, the Bismarck displaced over 50,000 tons, machinery for a top speed of 30.5 knots, and a main battery armament of 8 38cm or 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets, 2 forward and 2 aft. The main battery was roughly equivalent to the latest battleships of other nations, such as Britain, the United States, and Italy. The secondary battery included 12 150mm guns, 16 105mm guns, and a smattering of light anti-aircraft guns, which, like any other ship we've discussed, was altered throughout her short career. Her armor was good for her day, with the main belt having a maximum thickness of 320mm or 12.6 inches, backed by internal torpedo defense bulkheads. The main armor deck ranged from 80 to 120mm, while the main turret faces were around 360mm. The conning tower was 350mm. This made her extremely resilient to shell fire, though her underwater protection system was not as effective as Allied designs, being weaker near the armored citadel, where the ship's sides began to taper towards the bow and stern. This part of the design reflected an emphasis on speed, which resulted in a large part of the citadel being allocated to the propulsion plant. The overall result was a ship that combined massive protection, heavy guns, and good speed. However, she lacked modern radar fire control, and her AA battery was inadequate compared to later Allied ships. Bismarck was commissioned in August 1940. Her operational career only lasted 9 months, yet it was one of the most dramatic in naval history. In May 1941, under Admiral Lütjens, Bismarck sortied with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen for Operation Rheinübung, a breakout into the Atlantic to raid British convoys. On May 24th, she encountered HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales in the Denmark Strait. During this engagement, HMS Hood was destroyed, with most crediting Bismarck for landing the fatal blow. However, Bismarck was also damaged in the action. Prince of Wales scored 3 hits, one of which flooded a boiler room, reducing her speed and caused fuel leaks that left a trail across the ocean. Despite attempts to reach occupied France for repairs, she was relentlessly hunted by the Royal Navy. On May 26th, torpedo bombers from HMS Ark Royal struck Bismarck, jamming her rudder. Crippled and unable to maneuver, she was surrounded on the morning of the 27th by HMS King George V, HMS Rodney, and other attending Royal Navy ships. After a heavy bombardment and torpedo attacks, she was reduced to a burning wreck. At 10:40 a.m., she capsized and sank with a loss of over 2,000 men. Her entire career had only lasted one major operation. Her sister Tirpitz had a different fate. Commissioned in 1941, she was stationed in Norway to threaten Arctic convoys carrying supplies to the Soviet Union. Known as the Lonely Queen of the North, her very presence tied down a vast number of British ships, including the home fleet. Tirpitz sortied only rarely. She shelled Spitsbergen in 1943 and launched limited operations against convoys, but more often she remained in fjords under constant air attack. British commanders called her a fleeting being, dangerous because of what she might do rather than what she actually did. The Royal Navy and RAF launched a series of operations against her. Midget submarines damaged her in 1943, and heavy bombing raids in 1944 finally succeeded. On November 12, 1944, RAF Lancasters, armed with tallboy bombs, struck her in Tromsø Fjord. Several direct hits caused her to capsize, taking over 900 men down with her. The Bismarck Class has remained one of the most controversial in naval history, and for the most part, I can break it down into 4 points. First, the question of design. Bismarck was immensely strong, but reflected conservative German design thinking. She lacked an all-or-nothing armor scheme, her underwater protection was limited, and her guns, though powerful, were mounted in twin turrets, instead of triple or quads. Many historians argue that she was over-engineered and heavy for what she delivered. Second, her combat value. Bismarck's destruction of Hood was iconic, but her career was over after a single sortie. Critics argue that she was a strategic failure, a ship too valuable to risk, yet too vulnerable to the superior Allied fleets. Tirpitz was even more controversial. She spent years tied down, a symbolic threat but a strategic liability that consumed enormous resources. Third, the end of Bismarck. Her sinking remains debated. British shells and torpedoes reduced her to a wreck, but German survivors reported that her crew scuttled her to prevent capture. Modern wreck analysis suggests that both may be true. Fourth, the symbolism. Bismarck and Tirpitz represented Nazi Germany's desire to challenge Britain on the high seas, yet their cost in men and material yielded little strategic return. They were among some of the largest battleships ever built, but they never fulfilled their promise. Next, we have the Scharnhorst Class. The story of the Scharnhorst Class begins in the aftermath of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany's navy, the Reichsmarine, was limited by strict tonnage restrictions, but her naval leaders still sought a way to modernize and rebuild. The first step had been the Deutschland class of Panzerschiffs, or pocket battleships, a hybrid that fit into treaty loopholes. But by the late 1920s and early 1930s, strategic realities and foreign developments forced Germany to plan something more powerful. In 1930, the Reich government agreed to a replacement building program, which would gradually introduce new capital ships into the Navy. By 1933, with Hitler in power, this evolved into an open rearmament policy. The commissioning of the Deutschland had already provoked international responses, most notably the French Dunkirk class, fast battleships, with 8 330mm guns. Germany needed an answer. Initially, 2 ships designated D and E were to be new Panzerschiff, with improved armor speed and the same 283mm guns. However, their keels were scrapped in 1934 as designers began developing something larger. The result would become the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. From the start, these ships were controversial. Their official displacement was listed at about 26,000 tons, but in reality, they exceeded 31,000 tons. This was a clear breach of the Versailles Treaty. Their existence was legitimized only after the fact by the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935. In other words, the ships were political statements as much as warships, a symbol of Hitler's willingness to defy restrictions. Their armament has been equally debated. They carried 9 283mm 11-inch guns and 3 triple turrets, a formidable battery against cruisers, but underpowered compared to true battleships of the era, which mounted 14 or 15 or even 16-inch guns. This decision was political as much as practical, with larger guns risking treaty reactions. Later plans would even consider refitting them with 15-inch guns, but these never came to fruition. Propulsion was another area of disagreement. German engineers argued whether to install diesel engines, as used in the Deutschland class, or return to steam turbines. Diesels offered fuel economy and instant startup power, but they were bulky and limited in output. Steam turbines were less efficient, but allowed more power in a smaller space. In the end, steam turbines were chosen, capable of producing 160,000 shaft horsepower and driving the ships to speeds over 30 knots. Their armor scheme was respectable. In this sense, their protection was actually akin to actual battleships in the United States or Britain. Moving on to the design of the Gneisenau, as she is my favorite of the two, the ship was built by the Deutsche Werke in Kiel, having a standard displacement as of 1935 of 31,632 tons, and an operational tonnage of 37,902 tons. As for machinery, Gneisenau had 12 boilers that powered 3 sets of geared turbines, an individual housing, and 3 turbine rooms, which drove 3 shafts, producing a maximum of 160,050 shaft horsepower, giving the ship a top speed of 30.7 knots. As for armaments, the main battery consisted of 9 Model 1934 283mm 54 caliber guns and triple turrets, 2 forward and 1 aft. As for the secondary battery, it would consist of 12 150mm guns, with 8 in twin mountings and the other 4 in single mountings. There were also 14 105mm guns and twin turrets originally, with 16 37mm anti-aircraft guns and 10 20mm guns in single mountings. With this being said, there were later refits that would modify the armament. One of them was in 1941, when Gneisenau received 2 triple sets of torpedoes from the light cruiser Leipzig. Anyway, at the thickest point, the armor belt would be 350mm, with the bulkheads varying between 150mm to 200mm. The upper deck would have 50mm of armor, and the armored deck would vary between 80 and 95mm, while the armored deck slopes varied from 105mm to 110mm in thickness. The main battery turret face was 360mm, the sides 180, the rear 350, and the roof 180. She was laid down in May of 1935, launched in December of 1936, and commissioned in May of 1938. Both ships entered service just before World War II and became key units in Germany's surface fleet. They were fast, hard-hitting, and capable of long-range commerce raids. By 1941, Scharnhorst had even received torpedo tubes taken from the cruiser Leipzig, showing how German naval designers continued to modify her role. Their careers were dramatic. Both participated in Atlantic operations, sank Allied shipping, and struck fear into the British. Scharnhorst was destroyed in December 1943 at the Battle of the North Cape, overwhelmed by British forces, including the battleship Duke of York. Gneisenau, damaged by air attack after the Channel Dash in 1942, was never fully repaired. By 1943, Hitler himself ordered work stopped, and then she was eventually scuttled, being scrapped by the Polish in the 1950s. The biggest question surrounding the Scharnhorst class is simple. What were they? Battleships, battlecruisers, or something else like fast battleships? Allied leaders often called them battlecruisers. Churchill himself referred to them as battlecruisers in messages to other leaders, including Stalin. When Scharnhorst was sunk, Churchill reported it as the destruction of a battlecruiser. The Germans, however, officially classified them as Schlachtschiff, battleships. This was not just a matter of pride, but also reflected their view that the ships had sufficient armor to qualify them as battleships, even if their guns were smaller than contemporary battleships. Historians remain divided. Some, like Craig L. Simmons, describe them as oversized battlecruisers, fast, powerful, but undergunned. Others, like Vincent P. O'Hara, classify them as battleships, emphasizing their armor and role. Authors like Gerhard Koop and Klaus-Peter Schmolke strike a balance, calling them fast battleships, a compromise term that acknowledges their speed while maintaining their battleship status. The classification debate is fueled by what-if scenarios, though. After Gneisenau was damaged in 1942, plans existed to rearmor with 6 15-inch guns, replacing the original triple 11-inch turrets. This would have transformed her into a true battleship in many people's eyes. Work began, including the removal of her bow section to accommodate a longer hull, but the project was abandoned. As a result, to many, she remained undergunned, and the arguments continue. Finally, we come to HMS Hood. At the end of 1915, the Admiralty gained approval for new capital ships whose design would reflect the lessons of the Great War. Initially intended as an improved battleship, it was supposed to combine the firepower and speed of the Queen Elizabeth class with better seaworthiness and more modern underwater protection. A high freeboard was demanded to avoid the dangers of low-set casemates that proved useless and even hazardous in rough weather. Between 1915 and 1916, the Director of Naval Construction, Eustace Tennyson Danecourt, prepared several designs. Many were criticized due to docking limitations, as no floating dock existed that could accommodate their size. Still, the D&C pushed for greater beam, setting experiments that showed improved underwater protection. Small tube boilers were introduced to save space and weight. In January 1916, Admiral John Jellicoe, Commander-in-Chief of the Grand Fleet, reviewed the designs. He was unimpressed by more battleships and insisted the real need was fast battle cruisers, fearing Germany's new 30-knot ships, possibly armed with 15-inch guns. Admiral David Beatty, commander of the battlecruisers at the time, agreed, arguing that the older 12-inch gun battlecruisers were outclassed. To match this threat, the project shifted from battleships to battlecruisers. By February 1916, 3 designs were drawn up, one with 15-inch guns and heavy armor, another using small tube boilers to save displacement, and a third pushing speed to 32 knots. Designs with 18-inch guns were considered, but rejected due to supply limitations and the need for at least 8 guns to maintain fire control accuracy. Design B was preferred, and on April 7, 1916, the board approved it. By July, 4 ships were ordered: Hood, Howe, Rodney, and Anson. Hood was laid down on May 31st, the same day as the Battle of Jutland. The outcome of Jutland profoundly changed Hood's design. Losses of British battlecruisers led to revelations. By July 1916, armor was strengthened, particularly over magazines. Vertical protection was increased by 50%, though weight was a constant trade-off. Changes continued into 1917, including added protection for dynamos, magazine crowns, and main decks. By 1917, her final design emerged: a displacement of 41,200 tons, machinery developing 144,000 shaft horsepower, speed of 31 knots, and an armament of 8 15-inch guns and 4 twin turrets. Secondaries included 16 5.5-inch guns and 4 4-inch high-angle guns, with torpedo tubes above and below water. Armor was greatly improved, but still patchwork. Strengthened after Jutland, but limited by docking and weight concerns. As Hood was far advanced in construction, she escaped the 1917 cancellation of her 3 sisters. By August 1918, more changes were made, including thicker magazine crowns. Other weight-saving alterations included removal of some secondaries and torpedo tubes. She was commissioned in May 1920 as a battlecruiser. John Roberts summarized her nature. Hood was an extension of pre-war ideas, built on the Queen Elizabeth line, modified after Jutland, but not fully integrating all lessons. Patched together, she remained powerful enough to be the world's largest ship throughout the 1930s, and the symbolic pride of the Royal Navy. Fast forward to May 1941, and Hood was still the pride of the Royal Navy, though in desperate need of a refit. When reports came in of Bismarck's sortie into the Atlantic, Hood and the new Prince of Wales were sent to intercept. On May 23rd, the German ships Bismarck and Prince Eugen were shadowed by the cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk in the Denmark Strait. Admiral Holland aboard Hood steered northwest to cut them off, his decision reflecting a desire for aggressive action. At 5:35 a.m. on May 24th, Hood and Prince of Wales closed to 32,000 yards. Holland opened fire at 5:52, initially aiming at Prince Eugen, misidentified as Bismarck. Prince of Wales shifted fire to the real target. By 5:55, Bismarck returned fire. A salvo from the German ships hit Hood near the mainmast, causing a fire. At 6 a.m., Bismarck's fifth salvo delivered a fatal hit near Hood's after magazines. Hood erupted into a vast explosion, broke in two and sank within 3 minutes. Over 1,400 men were lost, and only 3 survived. The Board of Inquiry gathered witness statements. Observers from Suffolk and Norfolk, distant in the mist, reported a reddish fire, followed by a cone of flame and black smoke. Prince of Wales observers confirmed a fire on Hood's boat deck after the early hits. Captain Leach recalled seeing a hit near the mainmast, followed seconds later by a funnel-shaped blast. The board concluded that Hood was destroyed by a 15-inch shell from Bismarck, detonating the after magazines. They suggested a 4-inch magazine probably went first. Torpedo warheads were unlikely to have caused the main blast. Still, they admitted the exact mechanism could not be determined. Other theories emerged: a cordite fire flash like at Jutland, secondary fires, or even fire from Prince Eugen's 8-inch shells causing a disaster. None are proven. The 2001 survey of Hood's wreck found no definitive evidence to settle the matter. In the end, HMS Hood was both a triumph and a tragedy. Designed in part to respond to Jutland, she embodied patched lessons and compromises. For 2 decades, she stood as the pride of Britain, a symbol of naval power. Yet her loss in 3 minutes shocked the world, a reminder that even the mightiest ships could be brought down. Her design remains controversial, fast, powerful, but what to designate her? A battlecruiser like the British did, or a fast battleship like some others say? I'll let you decide. Her loss is equally controversial. The exact cause is something we'll most likely never know. Together with her life and death, embodied the debate over the value and vulnerability of a ship like HMS Hood. And yes, I know the title of the video says Battleships. Still, I have a character limit and can't say battleships and battlecruisers without it looking terrible. Plus, I'm sure it'll garner some comments from you all. Thank you all so much for watching this new series. I think it's going to be a fun one. In the future, we're going to dig into some other classes like the Congo class, Deutschland class, etc. Let me know what class or individual ship you'd like me to cover in the future down in the comments. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great day.